The Lars Larson Show.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It is a pleasure to be with you, especially on a day when President Donald Trump has taken such a strong action by firing the head of the FBI. No, not because he was looking into Russia, because even James Comey admitted there is no evidence of collusion with Russia, and so is Dianne Feinstein. No, because Comey had to go. Well, sometimes you get fired from jobs. And on that note, I turn to our friend Catherine Mars, who's a certified education consultant specializing in college admissions. Ms. Mars, welcome to the program. Let's talk about jobs and what are the best and worst jobs in America this year.
Well, thank you, Lars, for having me on your show. I'm looking forward to sharing information about the best and the worst.
Yeah, we don't want people to get fired. We want them to have the jobs they really enjoy. But I'm a little dismayed that the job I've had for the last 42 years, broadcaster, is number 2 on the list of the worst jobs in America. How did it make it to that point on the list?
I think if you look at how things are done today, I think, thank goodness for talk shows. But as a general rule, broadcasting and newspaper and TV reporter and all of those things are kind of going by the wayside when you've got Facebook and YouTube and all the different ways to use social media. It's sort of, making it the dark ages.
It might.
But
it might.
But, when I'm counseling kids about planning for their future and we talk about majors in college, I say, you really need to look around and know that there's a lot of things out there right now and some things that haven't even been created yet. If you think about the iPhone, it wasn't around 10 years ago, and there's got to be people who can service the iPhone and create new apps for the iPhone. So, I don't want kids to get too discouraged about their, prospects. But again, they do have to have one foot in reality.
No, I'd agree with you on that. Newspaper reporter is number 1 because newspapers were going out of business when I got into this business 40 years ago.
Exactly.
I remember a professor telling me, well, there were 3,000 of them in 1900, and today, when I was going to school in the 70s, he said there are about 1,900 of them. I have a feeling the number is probably below 1,000 now and rapidly headed towards 0. But it doesn't mean people are going to stop covering stories and reporting on them. It just probably means it'll be based on the web instead of based on dead trees.
Absolutely. And also, in the 70s when I was in college, occupational therapy was a growing occupation. It was something that kids and young people were getting into. Well, it's one of the top 10 best jobs now. And if you look at that, that's looking at demographics. Baby boomers are getting older, and they're going to need health care, and they're going to need a lot of assistance. And occupational therapists work with young people and old people. So the health professions are going to be always a positive place. And obviously STEM professions are always going to be a great place. And then there's things that we look around and like cybersecurity. That's going to be a growing field. That's not going to go away, sadly. The issue of the need for being able to decipher code and help protect us.
Now, number 3 on this list also bothers me. My dad was a forest ranger. He wasn't specifically a logger, but he worked with loggers. But how is logger the third worst job in America at this point, given that we all still like to live in wood houses? And, I mean, unless they figure out a different material that's better for building houses, there's stone, there's metal. They've all been tried. And they're all used in the right applications. But are we going to stop living in wood houses at some point?
I don't think so. I think that the reason why it's ranked as the third worst is the stress and the danger related to the actual logging. In other words, cutting down those huge giant trees and then getting them transported, et cetera. I don't think that's an easy job.
No, it's not.
And I think there's a whole lot of, occupational hazard that goes with that.
Yeah, although these days the mechanization of it, I've seen, I have a friend who owns some forest land, and he has a machine that's run by one guy who sits in a cab and cuts down trees all day long and does it almost, a whole lot safer than doing it with either a chainsaw or a double-bitted axe and a whole lot more efficiently, too.
But you've already answered the question, is that it's automated.
Yeah.
They don't need people. Like if if you look, let's see, I was just recently in Scotland on a distillery tour, and they only require like 1 to 8 workers now in a whiskey distillery, whereas they used to have in these places 50 and 60 people because they've automated so much of it.
Well, since I'm a fan of whiskey, I'm glad to hear that it's at least they're producing it more efficiently. You know, pest control worker. Now, how is that one going out of fashion? Because it would seem to me that if you have bigger and bigger cities with more and more people living close together, that's where the pests and the rats and the bugs tend to congregate, isn't it?
Well, I think so, but also you have to look at the environmentalists. The environmentalists do not want us using pesticides. So so many of the, there's a talk show here in Dallas that talks about organics and using cornmeal or cornstarch or all these different things to get rid of bugs in your flower beds. And so they're trying to get away from the pesticides. And then in addition to that, you've got pesticides are very dangerous. And so the pest control worker is exposed to some pretty horrible chemicals.
Now, what about taxi driver? That's number 10 on the worst jobs list. And yet, does that include the definition of Uber driver? Because it seems that there are now hundreds of thousands of people who are voluntarily going out and becoming what we once called taxi drivers, except that I talk to a lot of them, when I'm in an Uber, and they tell me they love the job.
Well, I think that's right there. Lyft and Uber are taking over taxi cabs. So it's far more efficient to take Uber because, at least that's what I have found, that you call them, you use an app to get an Uber, and they're there within a few minutes. And with a taxi cab, I've waited as long as an hour to get a cab from my home to go to the airport.
So maybe Uber goes to the top of the best jobs list and taxi stays at the bottom of the worst jobs list.
I think so.
Ms. Mars, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Where can people find your work online?
Oh, fabulous. At Mars, MARSCAA.com.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on, and I'm still going to be troubled by that logger position, number 3. I'd like to have a lot of loggers. I want them to be a lot safer, though, so I'm glad to see that. Thanks so much for the time tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Lars, for having me on your show.
It is my pleasure. That's Catherine Mars.